Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Andy, for that. As always, charismatic and humorous as ever. So, yeah, Mark Thurston, Chief Exec of HS2. But the other job I have, which I guess is relevant to this course, is I chair the Infrastructure Client Group, something Andy has chaired in the past. So I work with a whole series of clients across the infrastructure sector, public and private. So I'm able to sort of bring their perspective into this. Interestingly, where Giuliano mentioned in his introductory remarks, we were quite involved in the governance and the organisational design module, but I can see, having looked at the curriculum, how this would be useful for us as an employer. And of course, as HS2, like many of the organisations in the room, we're in a race for talent. So how do we sort of make sure we both attract, retain and sort of nurture the best leaders in the industry? And that's a big, big challenge for us all. And I think that's where this course really starts to sort of earn its money and pays back. If I think about the three things that I would sort of look to get out of it as an employer, why I would send someone on this MBA, is that they, in this world of sort of mega infrastructure projects now, they get to understand the difference between how we make complex things simple, because these projects are not short of complexity, how we create, recognising some of the things that other speakers have said, we create that sense of purpose for the project. What's its purpose? What's the outcome you're looking for, regardless of whether it was named by a politician, an engineer or somebody else. And I think at a very personal level, to Andy's point about having fun, but also that sense of awareness and the personal resilience and impact is a big personal time and a big financial investment in this course. And I think coming out the other side of it, really understanding your sense of personal well-being and your ability to have impact, I think it's going to be super, super crucial. So if you sort of translate that into the world of HS2, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about scale and complexity, because the frame of reference in my mind is, how do I sort of employ, coach, invest in and retain talent that can survive in the world in which I and my organisation exists? There's sort of some of the scale on there is self-evident. You can maybe read some of the stats yourself. It's 3 phases spread over half the geography of the UK, connecting the West Midlands to London in the south and Manchester in the north. We're well underway with phase 1, we're about 40% complete. I think this calendar year we would do something like 70 million hours on the programme. I was talking to a former exec director of the ODA last night, and she was making the point that at peak, the ODA delivering the Olympics, I think Martin's stat up there was £8.8 million sterling. I think at peak they were £100 million a month. 23, 24, 22, 23 and 24 are about our peak years of activity, and HS2, we're somewhere between 25 and 30 million pounds a day. So the scale and the controls environment and the leaders you need to operate in our sector, in our programme, is not insignificant. And so in my mind, I'm thinking about, how does this MBA help me invest in the leadership cohort in my organisation that will be able to survive and frankly thrive in the challenge of the scale of what we're doing, where, you know, this is a 30-year project. To get all the way from, it's interesting on Martin's slide, he had 34 at the end. The politicians have just put a couple of years on that with delays in funding. But the reality is we probably won't get to Manchester till sometime around 2040. And this thing started in just 29-10. So we're now in year 13 of a 30-year programme. So some people will both start and finish their careers on something as long and as sort of geographic spread as HS2. So I think that scale is a dimension for me about where this course can add some value. But you combine the scale with the complexity, just to sort of manage, just the basics of project delivery at scale, the things that, again, come back to some of the other speakers. There is no huge sort of what I would call rocket science to that. Most of what we're doing in HS2 has been done before to varying degrees in terms of the various components of the project, but no one has done something like this in living memory. The fact that we've got 3 phases live, it's technically very complex. There's a huge stakeholder dimension to it, as the slide says. We link up 4 of the 5 big economic regions of the country. 2.5 million people live within 5 miles of the route. So there's lots of postcodes and people who are impacted by our project. And as Andy knows, on Tidewave in the early days of Crossrail, and certainly we've got it on speed dial, understanding sort of the local NIMBYism, local stakeholder involvement, how you get planning consent, even with an Act of Parliament, is a hugely challenging issue. all those parliamentary constituencies. My job this morning was to walk the Public Accounts Committee around the Euston site because they issued their report on Euston yesterday, for those that watch this stuff, and I'll find myself with Bernadette Kelly, the Perm Sec, in front of them inside 4 weeks. And that's an important part of my job, and it sucks a whole load of people in my organisation in to get me ready for that moment in committee in 4 weeks' time, and of course all the local authorities. So that complexity, you're trying to build, this is a built environment, we're building infrastructure, the idea to plan it, design it, construct it and bring it into commissioning in itself is relatively routine. As I say, there's nothing that we're doing physically that's not been done before. But the scale of what we're doing, and you put it in that complex environment, you then have a challenge in terms of the sort of leaders you need in an organisation, which frankly is unprecedented. So I just tried to sort of codify the leadership challenge into these 4 boxes. I think the other thing about being a public sector client, which is what I am, Andy talked about private sector, huge amount of overlap between our 2 organisations. Many of the people that did work for Andy have now worked for us. But particularly what I've found in being a public sector client is we're on the cusp between the public and the private sector. So we've got 30,000 people in the field. Over 2,500 businesses, private businesses working on HS2. We're an organisation of about 2,000 people, mostly public servants, not civil servants. So in one direction we've got this huge supply chain, right spread across the country. In the other direction I've got Whitehall. Ministers and the civil service, which in itself, as many of you in the room will know, provides a challenge. So being sort of meat in that sandwich requires a certain level of resilience. There's an accountability, I'm the accounting officer for us, and profile that comes with that I think is crucial to the people who are going to think about taking this course on. Andy's talked about organisation and culture. We've done a huge amount of work with Deloitte at HS2 to demonstrate to government that we're fit for purpose and they can trust us to manage the project. And Giuliano talked about, just before we start today, in his view still, from all their global research in UCL, an unprecedented piece of work. The governance and the controls environment is profound for us. When you're churning over 25 to 30 million pounds a day, I think we ingest something like 6 million pieces of cost data every month into our ingestion platform for our project controls platform at HS2. So again, you have to set yourself up as a client and as a leader to deal with that. And of course, I've talked about a fairly significant supply chain, which of course changes over time, over phase, over geography. So I guess, whether you're coming from finance, commercial, project management, if I think about the sorts of people that would want to go into this course, they could come from a range of sort of technical disciplines. But I think what this UCL MBA gives is, at the other side of it, I think, Martin and Andy have talked about this, is we're going to create, hopefully, a sort of cohort of infrastructure leaders, which this country is going to need for years to come. I won't do this job forever. You've had, there's very non-diverse speaking at the front of this room. Most of the people I think that would be speaking at the front of this room in 5 years' time would either be female or of colour. So we've got to become more diverse as a workforce. We've got to create a different set of leaders in this business. I think this MBA's got an important part to play. But come back to my 3 things. When you've come out the other side of this, for me, you understand this issue around complexity and simplicity. You feel very confident in creating a sense of purpose for the organisation for which you represent and you lead huge numbers of people. And your own sense of sort of resilience and impact is something you've become very aware of, because that's what you need to create, I think, if these projects are going to be successful, that sense of fellowship. So your personality really needs to come through. And again, I think Andy talked about that. So, last perspective, back to Mr. Hansford. Thank you.